And Mitt Romney has officially been nominated as the Republican candidate for the US presidency at the Republican convention in Tampa, Florida. The nomination comes 6 years after he first began to run for the White House.
The Honorable Mitt Romney of the state of Massachusetts has received 2,061 votes. More than a majority of those votes entitled to be cast at this convention.
Paul Ryan also nominated as vice presidential candidate, rounding the ticket that will challenge President Barack Obama in November.
I move that Paul Ryan from the state of Wisconsin be nominated by acclamation by this Republican National Convention as its candidate for the office of Vice President of the United States. Mr. Chairman, Paul Ryan believes in America.
Mr. Romney's wife, Ann Romney, will be the keynote speaker at the convention in a few hours' time. Well, for more on the latest developments in US politics, Brendon O'Connor from the US Studies Centre joins us live in the studio. Brendon, I guess first if you can give us a bit of flavour in terms of why we see this big proceeding, in terms of this big congressional sort of hearing. It seemed to have been done and dusted some time ago that Romney was going to be the man to lead the Republicans to the next election. Why all this hoo-ha, this voting all of a sudden?
Well, these conventions are a tradition. They used to nominate the actual nominee from the party just at the convention. Then they started having primaries and caucuses, which go on for about 4 or 5 months. And so Romney, as you say, was basically the nominee back in April, but there's been a period of kind of shadow campaigning, pretty hard campaigning, really. And then this old tradition of conventions, which goes back a long way in American politics, where you get very enthusiastic about your candidate, you yell and scream at anything they say, and we'll see plenty of this in the next 3 days. Lots of red, white and blue, balloons, funny-looking hats, and it's to buoy the candidate up, to give the candidate a real sort of kick into the final stretch of the campaign.
So they don't so much have a meaning in terms of any real power. There's no real voting process that goes on anymore that means anything. It's more like I saw someone call it an infomercial this morning. A
product launch, some have called it. It could be important if the candidates in the primaries were really close. If no one reached the magic number that they need of delegates, then they'd have to fight it out at the convention, and that would be lots of fun. That would be fascinating to watch, and people were salivating that Santorum and Romney would not reach the magic number and would have to fight it out at the convention. But usually that's pretty difficult to imagine because the races over time wear out the candidates and one person usually emerges. But Clinton and Obama last time as candidates for the Democrats were fairly close, and people were also salivating about, you know, blood on the floor of the convention to some extent.
I mean, the cash that must be spent on these campaigns, even in just terms of these conventions and you know, just the balloons alone look like they've had a fortune spent on them. What kind of money are we talking here?
Well, all up, Obama nearly spent about $1 billion on his campaign in 2008, and I think he'll get close to that. Both candidates will get in the sort of close to the $1 billion mark. So we're talking, you know, even an event like this in Tampa, probably millions of dollars spent on, you know, the fanfare, the hotels. So for the local economy in a kind of area where there's hurricanes, which deters tourists, this stuff is very good for the local economy, I'd say. Whether it's spending in a wise way, you could argue about it, but it does inject some money into places like Tampa, obviously.
OK, we should talk a bit about Romney and also Paul Ryan, and in terms of what they have planned for the economy. And we know the Republicans stand for small government and conservative ideals, but can you just, I guess, outline for us how they would run the economy differently to what Obama would?
Well, how much detail we'll get will be interesting. I mean, they'll argue that they're experts, that Romney particularly is a businessman, where Obama is a novice. He'll suggest that he's got a kind of a plan to get America out of this kind of long period of basic kind of recession or near recession that it's in at the moment. So I don't know how much detail, apart from arguing that taxes don't need to be increased for the wealthiest Americans you'll get. Paul Ryan favours a flat tax rate, but that won't come in. Paul Ryan favours much more of an anti-government position, much more government cutbacks, some real fairly sort of radical ideas about American welfare and entitlement programs, where Romney is a man of caution in many regards. So I think he'll speak big about himself being the better candidate for the economy, but the details, as a lot of these conventions are, will probably be fudged to some extent.
I mean, they're really selling themselves as businessmen and Mr. Fix-Its for the American economy, aren't they? And with an unemployment rate of around 8%, that message must be cutting through on some level.
I think so. This is why they've got a chance. I mean, Romney has run a pretty bad campaign. He's hardly been one of the most charismatic or, great performers on the stump in American politics. He really sort of stacks up pretty poorly, but the times are difficult in America, and enough people have got a short memory to say, look, Obama's been in for 3.5 years plus, it's his fault. If the economy's not going well, he should have done something about it, so let's try someone new. Obama's hoping that people will say, well, I did inherit something rather unfortunate, and it's not just merely my fault. Really, these Republicans would be worse.
OK, just quickly before we go, in terms of the fiscal cliff that we have emerging, a lot of investors are very concerned about this in the United States. How would both parties handle it differently?
I think it is a major concern. I mean, I think the big problem is medical coverage. I mean, American medical coverage is incredibly expensive. This is where Ryan is interesting, maybe radical and dangerous, but Ryan, I think, confronts the issue and says medical coverage is the real big problem in the fiscal cliff.
Brendon O'Connor from the US Studies Centre, we really appreciate your time up on the desk.
My pleasure.